Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Jimmy Dore Show. We're going to talk about Labor Day a little bit, but what's the most important thing about Labor Day, I think, is the labor, right? We got to tip our hats to labor. What is unions, which have been decimated in this country? I remember when Ronald Reagan fired PATCO. That was the air traffic controllers. But right now, let me say hello to Steph Morano, and let's say hello to Ron Placone. There you go.
Hi, Jimmy.
Hello.
I caught my tech guy away from the table. That's why I did that. So here's Bernie Sanders talking about unions. So let's listen to what Bernie has to say.
I think that many people in my generation, many young people, don't quite understand how unions work, or they don't feel identified by the labor movement. How would you make a union sexy again for young people?
That's a great question. Look, the answer is pretty simple. What a union is an understanding that when people come together, they have more power. That if you are dealing with your employer and you're getting low wages, and you go up to your boss and say, hey, could you give me some more money? The guy says, hey, you know what, I got 10 other people who want your job. But if you walk in with a union and you sit down and you have collective bargaining and you have the power to strike, for example, then your owners have got to listen to you. They have to listen to your demands. So that's historically what unions have been about. Now, in the last many years, we have seen a decline in trade unionism in this country for a lot of reasons. And you're right, I think there are millions of young people who really are not familiar with what unions are about. And the reason for that is we've seen many manufacturing jobs which were unionized leave this country. We've seen anti-union activity. But basically, if we are looking as we are today, Fernando, at a generation, your generation, which everything being equal, will have a lower standard of living than your parents. We're moving in the wrong direction. Clearly, young people have got to stand together, to come together, to demand that public colleges and universities be tuition free, that we raise the minimum wage to a living wage, that we join the rest of the industrialized world and have health care for all, etc. But bottom line of what a union is that alone, there are limits to what you can do. When you stand with your brothers and sisters, there's a lot you can accomplish.
What about it?
That's a great point. So that's if you're a teacher, you go in and individually negotiate your contract. I don't know if it would be as good. Probably wouldn't. So that's the power of numbers. That's the power of unions. And, Nissan, don't quote me exactly on the numbers on this, but I think Nissan has 50 plants where they manufacturing plants worldwide. Only 3 of their plants are not union. Only 3 of Nissan's plants are not union in the whole world. And you know where those 3 plants are? United States. And that's what right to work is. What a failure our media has done by informing people of what right to work means. Because if you're a blue-collar worker and you vote for right to work, that means you've been propagandized. That means you've been duped. Because it's bad for you. Right to work means you have the right to work for less wages without the protection of unions. And all that means is the company takes more of the money in profit from and doesn't share. They share less of the profits with the workers, and more of that money goes to their shareholders. That's what that means.
And they also don't owe you anything as far as a work-life balance goes. Because
Right.
your right to work means they can just, again, it comes down to the verbiage. They're not regulations, they're protections.
Right.
It's called right to work. It should be called right to exploit.
That's what it
That's
is.
what it is.
Jimmy, according to, you mentioned Nissan and the unions, they said the Kenton plant shows a grim pattern of labor abuses. And the National Labor Relations Board, an agency of the U.S. government, has charged Nissan with threatening, restraining, and coercing employees in the exercise of their right to organize a union, threatening to close the plant if the workers unionize, threatened to falsify employee records to retaliate against workers, unlawfully instituted a company uniform policy that effectively banned workers from wearing not pro-union T-shirts.
Wow.
And this is according to the Industrial Global Union.
So I just checked, according to NBC News, 42 out of 45 Nissan plants are unionized. Those three. They had a vote in Mississippi on August 4th, 3rd or 4th, to see if they were going to unionize the Mississippi Nissan plant. They voted against it. The workers did. They've been propagandized. So that's what all that intimidation tactics they did, they work. That's why they do them. They wouldn't threaten to close down their plant if they unionize, if that didn't scare workers. They wouldn't threaten to falsify their work records. They wouldn't threaten all that other stuff if it didn't work. And it worked. They voted down the union. They voted down the union in Mississippi.
And Mississippi is a right-to-work state.
That's called a right-to-work state, yeah.
Yeah, I have experience with right-to-work states because I used to live in Tennessee, which is also a right-to-work state. And, and the propaganda is so thick 'cause I would meet people. I knew this one guy, he was a warehouse worker. He worked 6 days a week. 50 hours a week was a good week. That was his low end, 50 hours a week. No air conditioning, 6 days a week, no PTO, no benefits. I think he got a day or two off in December to use as he chose. And I'm like, this is insane. And he's like, well, I need to have my job, and I wouldn't have my job if it wasn't for And I'm like, hold on, dude. Like, listen to what you just said. You think that if they weren't able to exploit you like this, that they could just they need your work. They need your labor. You ship their products.
Right.
They need you. That need's not going to go away if they have to treat you better.
Right.
They're just going to have to treat you better.
Well, that's the whole thing about, they say the same thing about fast food workers. Like, oh, well, we're going to replace you with robots. They raised the $15 minimum, or they're going to close. They raised the $15 minimum wage in Seattle. You see all the Burger King's closed down, moved out of the city. So the same thing with Quiznos, same thing with McDonald's, Taco Bell. They all closed up. And the ones that stayed are all replaced by robots. So that didn't happen. They raised the minimum wage. Everybody's still making a lot of money. Isn't that funny? That McDonald's still thinks it's worthwhile. It's a profit-seeking entity which thinks they can find profit in Seattle. Isn't that funny? So don't listen to the propaganda, which it is. And God damn it, comes down to our politicians. So politicians need to... But politicians are, again, we have two parties representing management. The Democrats and the Republicans both represent management in the United States. And that's why we have the income inequality the way it is. That's why half the country is poor or low income. Half the country in the richest country in the world is poor or low income. Wow. So, and we're rich. We got more money. The stock market's booming. Stock market is booming. Richer than the country's got more money than it's ever had, and the people are poorer than they've ever been. That's called an effed up system. So you got to fix the system. One of the great ways to help push against the predatory capitalism is unions. But the politicians have let unions be decimated. Barack Obama never put on a soft shoe. He never stood up for the teachers who got their union taken away in Wisconsin. Barack Obama did not stand up for them.
Well, I want to say this, too, going back to the video where the person was speaking for, like, my age group as far as union goes. And, yeah, we did come of age during Clinton and beyond. So, yeah, we've only heard a lot of anti-union stuff. And a lot of people in my generation, the idea of the union is just sort of a dated thing that may or may not be applicable to us. Unless you talk to people in my age group that are in them. Then you are going to hear an entirely different story. I grew up in Pennsylvania. I have friends in Youngstown, Ohio, and even in other parts of Pennsylvania that are in different types of unions for iron workers and stuff like that, because that stuff does still go on there to a degree. They will tell you an entirely different story on the union. They love their unions. They stand by their unions. So I think it's just not as prevalent as it once was.
Look who has unions. Michael Jordan was in a union. The referees are in a union. Mm-hmm. The umpires are in a union. The Major League Baseball players are in a union. Millionaires are in a union. Why are they in a union? Because they know if they don't band together, they're going to be exploited by their employers. So that's why they band together as a union, even though they're all millionaires. Isn't that something? But we shouldn't. But you can't have a minimum wage worker have our union protection. The people with absolutely no power, they're the ones who need it the most. You know who else has unions? Pilots. Airline pilots have a union. Isn't that weird? Airline pilots, airline flight attendants, professional sport athletes, they have unions. Isn't that something? But we don't think auto workers should have unions. We don't give restaurant employees unions. Really? Isn't that weird? Yeah, it is. It's backwards. And that's why we're living in the country we're living in. And it's just one big capitalistic, as Bill Hicks used to say, one big capitalistic gangbang, and you are getting banged. They're exploiting you. So that's how capitalism works right now. That's how capitalism works. And I don't see any politicians beside Bernie Sanders with any kind of clue on how to fix it. No one, Democrats won't even stand up for unions. Do you ever see a Democrat screaming about we have to strengthen unions?
No, they don't even talk about unions.
No.
They're not even talking about the fact that the Trump administration, should something like right to work go federal, that would pretty much squash unions. They're not even talking about that. They're not even talking about how awful right to work is.
No. And why is that, Ron? I'll tell you why. Because the Democrats are bought by Wall Street. Mm-hmm. And you can't be in bed with Wall Street and stick up for workers and unions. And so if you don't do that, the country's going to keep sliding into the shitter, which it's doing. People are really hurting in America. That's why you got Trump in the first goddamn place. And Tom Perez and Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein and Chuck Schumer think they can shovel you more bullshit, which they are. And it looks like we're going to have more losses. The Democrats are going to have to lose again. Or Bernie starts a third party. That's what I'm hoping for. I'm going to draft Bernie next weekend in Washington, D.C. at American University. I'm part of that. Ron's going to be there. Steph's going to be there. Brian Granillo. So we need something. Cornel West will be there. Shama Sawant will be there. So we'll see you there next weekend. I think we need a third party. I don't know. I'm not a good forecaster. Some people have a vision for the future. I don't think the Democrats are going to reform enough to make a difference. And, we've tried to take over the party from the inside. We tried to do it here in California. We all showed up and voted, and we had way more Bernie-crats get elected as Democratic delegates to the party. Turns out they screwed us anyway. They have superdelegates on the state level. So I don't know. That to me, it seems like the mechanism is there to make sure reform never happens in the Democratic Party, and it looks like it's not happening. So what do? I think we have to start a third party. Seriously start a third party. The Democrats are not going to reform on their own. So we have to pressure them with a third party, or we have to do something, or maybe just get rid of them. If Bernie Sanders ran for president, if he announced it today that he was running in his own party, the Democrats would A, shit themselves, and B, that would be Bernie would win. That's what I think. And that's an uphill climb with a third party. But there ain't nobody coming close to as popular as Bernie Sanders, and that's how you change the Democratic Party. You change it from the outside. Just like I said, if everybody who believed in the Green New Deal that I know voted for Jill Stein last election, they would have got 15% of the vote. It would have completely, what would that have transformed? The Democratic Party. Because the Democrats would have then had to come to the Greens to get their vote, instead of what they do now is wag their finger at them. So now the corporate Democrats wag their finger at progressives and environmentalists and smear them. That's their outreach to get their votes. If we would have gotten 15% of the vote, they couldn't do that anymore. But they're still doing that. And that's why our country's still in the spot it is. So support your unions. Remember on Labor Day what Labor Day is really about. And remember how we got Labor Day. Because the government sent a bunch of thugs to kill a bunch of workers who were striking for better conditions. That's why we got Labor Day. We got Labor Day because people had to fight for it. Unions had to fight for it. That's why we got an 8-hour workday, overtime pay. That's why we have weekends. That's why we have health benefits. That's why we got rid of child labor. Because of unions, and you have to fight for it. Now we don't have now they're getting rid of everything. They're getting rid of overtime pay.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody has a pension. They're getting rid of overtime pay. And that's what happens when Wall Street runs the country, and it runs the country because the Democrats got in bed with them in the 90s, and it's been all over for the Democrats ever since. They lost to George W. Bush, and then they lost to Donald Trump. So this is why we need strong unions. Hey everybody, we have 2 live Jimmy Dore shows in September. September 25th, we're in San Diego, and September 18th in Burbank, California. Get your tickets right there. There's a link right there.